Hello AP Biology students, I'm going to go over the statistics assignment that I assign for a summer assignment and that other teachers use as well. For these next couple of videos, I'm going to go over the answers of the questions and how to work through the problems. I think I'm going to try to do only one page of problems for each of these videos. For example, this video is going to focus on the first two questions of this assignment. So on the first two pages of this assignment, we're going to be working with something called standard deviation. And I'm not going to go over all of these variables, but this is the equation and these are the variables that are included. For each of the questions, you basically have to try to figure out the average, the standard deviation, and then graph both the average and standard deviation on a bell curve. So let's go over the first question. A junior high basketball team played 5 games. The number of baskets scored by the junior high team are as follows. You can see them there. So what we have to do is we have to calculate a standard deviation for this data set. First of all, the average of this data set is 6.2. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use each data point and subtract the average from that data point. Again, here are the data points, 8, 4, 6, 6, and 7, and here are all the averages. And if you see, this chart does it for us. 8 minus 6.2 is 1.8. 4 minus 6.2 is negative 2.2, and so on and so forth. Now what we're going to do with each of those numbers is square it, because in the equation you can see we have to square each of these differences. So we take this number and square it. We then take this number and square it. We take this number and square it. We take this number and square it. We take this number and square it. Now we take the sum of all of those differences. And as you can see, our sum is 8.8. It's also really important to remember that this 8.8 is not the standard deviation. We only calculated the top portion here. Now we have to calculate the bottom portion before we take the square root of that number. Now we plug that into the top of the equation. So standard deviation equals the square root of 8.8 divided by n minus 1. N is the number of data points, which there are 5. There are 5 data points here. Now we take 5 minus 1, which is 4. So standard deviation is going to be the square root of 8.8 divided by 4. 8.8 divided by 4 is 2.2. The square root of 2.2 is 1.48, which means standard deviation for this problem in this data set is 1.48. Now we have to take the standard deviation and the average and plot them on a bell curve. As you can see here, our average is 6.2, which is in the middle. We're going to add 1.48 and subtract 1.48. This is our first standard deviation. Then we're going to add another 1.48 and subtract another 1.48. That's 2 standard deviations. And then lastly, again, we're going to add another 1.48 and subtract another 1.48. That's 3 standard deviations. And that's the end of problem 1. In the second problem here, an AP Biology class took a test and the following shows how the students scored. You can see there are 6 total scores here. What we have to do again is find the mean, standard deviation, and plot both on a graph. The first thing you gotta do is you gotta add up all those numbers and divide by 6 since there are 6 different data points. And this leads us to have an average of 76.8. Now we're going to take the mean or the average and subtract it from each of the data points. Again, here are our data points and here is the average. When you subtract, you can see you get these numbers. Then we're going to square each of these numbers. After you square each of these numbers, you add up all of the numbers to find the sum and you get 1,473.6. If you get a number that's pretty close to here, you might have just rounded a little bit differently than I did, which at this point is really okay because we're just getting introduced to this type of math. Remember, that 1400 number is not the standard deviation. You have to use that number and divide it by n minus 1, which is the number of data points again. That is 6. So 6 minus 1 is 5. 1,473.6 divided by 5 is 294.72. And if you take the square root of that, you get the standard deviation, which is 17. Again, if this number is just a little bit off, it's because we rounded differently, which is okay. Now we have our mean or the average and our standard deviation. Now what we have to do is we have to plot this on a graph. All right, here's our bell curve, and in the middle you put the average, 76.8. For each standard deviation, you're going to add and subtract the standard deviation. So between these two numbers is our first standard deviation. Now we add and subtract another 17, and between these two numbers is 2 standard deviations. And lastly, we're going to add and subtract one more. This is where 3 standard deviations are going to occur.